The iron chains bit deep into Eagle Feather's ankles as he swung the 16-pound sledgehammer against the unyielding granite. Blood seeped through his torn moccasins, mixing with the Colorado dust that coated everything in the railroad construction camp. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead, turning the chain gang worksite into a furnace of human suffering. "Move faster, you savage," Overseer Johnson. His whip cracked through the air. The proud Arapaho warrior who had once served as a scout for the United States Army was now prisoner number 47 in the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad chain gang. 6 months ago, he had been a free man living in the wilderness with Maria Cornell, the disgraced doctor who had become his unlikely companion. Now she was somewhere out there, probably dead from starvation or wild animals, while he broke rocks under the watchful eyes of armed guards. The heavy chain connecting his ankle to 11 other prisoners clanked with each movement, a constant reminder of his captivity. Around him, men of all races and backgrounds suffered together under the brutal Colorado sun. Former soldiers, cattle rustlers, claim jumpers, and Indians like himself, all reduced to human machinery in service of progress. Eagle Feather, his dark eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of hope in the barren landscape. Somewhere beyond those distant mountains lay freedom, but the chains that bound him seemed as permanent as the granite he was breaking into pieces for the railroad bed. How had it come to this? How had a respected Army scout become a convict laborer, slowly dying under the weight of justice? The story began months earlier, in a small town called Silver Creek, with a woman doctor whose world had collapsed around her. The autumn wind of 1880 carried the scent of dying leaves through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Colorado. Dr. Maria Cornell stood in the doorway of her modest clinic, watching as Mayor Henderson approached with 3 members of the town council. Their faces were carved from stone, their eyes cold as the mountain peaks that surrounded their settlement. "Dr. Cornell," Mayor Henderson spoke with a voice that had once welcomed her warmly, "the council has reached a decision regarding your recent failures." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her black medical bag. The memory of little Sarah Henderson, the mayor, his 7-year-old daughter, still haunted her dreams. The child had succumbed to scarlet fever despite Maria's desperate efforts to save her. 3 sleepless nights she had spent by the girl's bedside, trying every treatment known to medicine, but the fever had claimed another innocent soul. "I did everything possible," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible above the creaking of weathered wood signs swaying in the wind. The scarlet fever outbreak was beyond anyone's control. "That is not how this community sees it," replied Councilman Brooks, his weathered face showing no mercy. "We trusted you with our children's lives. We brought you here after your husband, Sheriff Cornell, died protecting this town. We gave you respect, patience, a home." The golden locket containing her late husband's photograph felt heavy against her chest. Thomas Cornell had been gunned down 2 years earlier while stopping a bank robbery. The town had embraced his widow then, grateful for his sacrifice. Now that same town was casting her out like a diseased animal. "You have until sunset to gather your belongings and leave Silver Creek," Mayor Henderson announced. "You are no longer welcome here, Maria Cornell. Find somewhere else to practice your medicine." As the men walked away, their boots echoing on the wooden boardwalk, Maria felt the weight of complete isolation crushing down upon her shoulders like an avalanche from the nearby mountains. 3 weeks had passed since Maria Cornell found refuge in the abandoned Prospector's cabin nestled deep within the rocky walls of Devil's Canyon. The structure was little more than rotting timber and rusted tin, but it provided shelter from the harsh October winds that howled through the mountain passes like the voices of lost souls. Each morning, Maria would emerge from her makeshift home to find mysterious gifts waiting by her doorstep. Fresh rabbit meat wrapped in clean cloth, bundles of dry firewood stacked neatly against the cabin wall, strange herbs she did not recognize, yet somehow knew possessed healing properties that her medical training had never taught her. The footprints in the dirt were unlike any she had seen before. Soft leather moccasins instead of heavy boots. The stride was measured, careful, belonging to someone who moved through the wilderness as naturally as water flows downstream. Maria would study these tracks each morning, trying to understand who her silent benefactor might be. From her small window, she began to notice a lone figure on horseback appearing each dawn on the ridge overlooking her canyon hideaway. The rider would remain motionless for several minutes, silhouetted against the rising sun like a statue carved from shadow. Even from such a distance, Maria could see that he sat his horse with the natural grace of someone born to the saddle. The mysterious horseman wore what appeared to be a weathered army coat over traditional Indian clothing. Through her father's old spyglass, Maria could make out the faded blue of military wool and the distinctive brass buttons that caught the morning light. Yet beneath this coat, she glimpsed fringed leather and colorful beadwork that spoke of an entirely different heritage. Who was this person who moved like a ghost through her daily existence? Why did he help her while maintaining such careful distance? Maria found herself looking forward to his morning appearances, this stranger who had become her lifeline in the unforgiving wilderness of the Colorado Territory. The morning mist clung to the canyon walls like ghostly fingers when Maria finally decided to confront her mysterious benefactor. She had risen before dawn, positioning herself behind a cluster of boulders along the path she knew her silent guardian would take. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she waited, clutching her medical bag like a shield. The sound of approaching hoofbeats was barely audible, muffled by the soft earth and morning fog. When the rider finally appeared, Maria was struck by how silently he moved through the wilderness. His horse, a paint stallion with distinctive markings, stepped carefully around loose stones without making a sound. "I know you have been watching me," Maria called out, stepping from her hiding place. Her voice echoed off the canyon walls, startling a family of ravens into flight. The rider pulled his horse to a halt, his hand moving instinctively toward the cavalry saber hanging at his side. Maria noticed he did not reach for any firearm, though she could see the empty holster on his belt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness. "You are the widow of Sheriff Cornell," he said in perfect English, his accent carrying only the slightest trace of his native tongue. "I knew your husband. He was a good man who treated my people with respect when others would not." Maria felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes at the mention of Thomas. "You knew my husband? I am Eagle Feather of the Arapaho Nation," he replied, dismounting from his horse with fluid grace. "I served as a scout for the United States Army until I could no longer wear their uniform with honor." The pain in his voice was unmistakable. Maria recognized the look of someone carrying tremendous guilt, the same expression that stared back at her from mirrors since little Sarah Henderson, his death. "You deserted," she said quietly, without judgment. Eagle Feather nodded solemnly. "After Sand Creek, after what they made me witness, I could not continue. Now I am hunted by the very men I once called brothers." The partnership between Maria and Eagle Feather began with necessity but soon blossomed into mutual respect. Each possessed skills the other desperately needed to survive in the harsh Colorado wilderness. Eagle Feather taught Maria how to read animal tracks in the soft earth, showing her the difference between the prints of deer and elk, rabbit and prairie dog. "The mountain speaks to those who know how to listen," Eagle Feather explained as he demonstrated how to set snares using thin wire salvaged from abandoned mining equipment. His hands moved with practiced precision, creating traps that would provide meat without causing unnecessary suffering to the animals. Maria found herself learning to move through the forest without disturbing the natural rhythm of the wilderness. Eagle Feather showed her which plants could be eaten safely, which roots provided the best nutrition during the lean winter months that were rapidly approaching. In return, Maria tended to the old wounds that Eagle Feather had carried since his military service. Saber cuts across his shoulder and back had healed poorly, leaving him with constant pain that he had endured in silence for years. Using her medical knowledge, Maria cleaned and treated these injuries properly for the first time. "Your people's medicine is different from ours," Eagle Feather observed as Maria applied fresh bandages made from torn pieces of her petticoat. "But both seek to heal what has been broken." They established a routine of constant movement, never remaining in one location for more than 3 days. Eagle Feather had taught Maria that staying mobile was essential to avoid the army patrols that periodically swept through the territory searching for deserters and hostile Indians. Each evening, they would make camp in carefully chosen locations that provided natural concealment and multiple escape routes. Eagle Feather would scout the surrounding area while Maria prepared their simple meals over fires built to produce minimal smoke. "The bounty hunters are getting closer," Eagle Feather warned one crisp November morning as he returned from his dawn reconnaissance. "I saw fresh horse tracks near Red Rock Creek. We must move deeper into the mountains." The thundering of hoofbeats echoed through Devil's Canyon like the drums of war. Major Wilson led a column of 12 cavalry soldiers, their blue uniforms pristine despite the harsh journey through the rocky terrain. The brass buttons on their coats gleamed in the afternoon sun as they methodically searched every cave and crevice where a fugitive might hide. Maria and Eagle Feather pressed themselves deeper into the shadows of the limestone cave they had discovered high on the canyon wall. The entrance was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines and weathered rock formations. Eagle Feather of the Arapaho Nation, Major Wilson, his voice boomed across the canyon floor. You are commanded to surrender yourself to the authority of the United States Army. You will be treated fairly under military law if you come forward voluntarily. Eagle Feather, his jaw tightened as he listened to the words of his former commanding officer. Maria could see the internal struggle playing across his weathered features. Part of him wanted to end this endless running, to face whatever justice awaited him with dignity. I know you are here somewhere, Major Wilson continued, his horse stepping carefully over the loose stones. The Ute scouts have been tracking you for weeks. There is nowhere left to run. Through a gap in the cave entrance, Maria watched as the soldiers dismounted and began searching systematically. They moved with military precision, checking every possible hiding place methodically. She noticed that their weapons remained holstered. They wanted Eagle Feather alive, not dead. He is not alone, called out Sergeant Murphy, kneeling beside a small fire pit where Maria and Eagle Feather had cooked their breakfast that morning. 2 sets of tracks, Major, one wearing boots, smaller feet, probably a woman. Maria's heart sank as she realized their hiding place might not remain secret much longer. The soldiers were getting closer, their voices growing louder as they climbed the rocky slope toward their cave. Eagle Feather served this army with honor for 8 years, Maria suddenly called out from the cave entrance, surprising both Eagle Feather and the soldiers below. He saved more lives than he ever took. He deserves better than to be hunted like a common criminal. The morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon floor when Eagle Feather made his fateful decision. For 3 days, they had remained hidden in the cave while the cavalry patrol systematically searched the surrounding area. Their water supply was running dangerously low, and Maria was beginning to show signs of dehydration. I cannot let you suffer because of my choices, Eagle Feather whispered to Maria as he prepared to descend to the small stream that wound through the canyon bottom. I will get water in return before the soldiers make their morning patrol. Maria grasped his arm desperately. Please, do not go. We can wait another day. The soldiers will eventually move on to search other areas. But Eagle Feather had already made up his mind. He moved with the silent grace that had made him such an effective scout, slipping from shadow to shadow as he made his way down the treacherous rocky slope. Maria watched from the cave in trance, her heart pounding with fear for his safety. The ambush came suddenly and without warning. 6 soldiers emerged from concealment among the boulders near the stream, their movements coordinated with military precision. Sergeant Murphy stepped forward with heavy iron shackles, the metal gleaming coldly in the morning light. Eagle Feather, you are under arrest for desertion from the United States Army, Major Wilson announced formally. You will be transported to Fort Collins for military tribunal and sentencing. Eagle Feather did not resist as they bound his hands with the heavy chains. He stood with quiet dignity, his dark eyes searching the canyon walls until they found the cave where Maria remained hidden. For a brief moment, their gazes met across the distance, and she saw him mouth the words, "Stay hidden," before turning away. The iron shackles were designed for the most dangerous prisoners, weighing nearly 20 pounds and connecting his wrists to a chain around his waist. The soldiers mounted him on a horse with his feet bound to the stirrups, making escape impossible. As the cavalry column prepared to depart, Maria heard Major Wilson addressing his prisoner. The tribunal has already found you guilty in absentia, Eagle Feather. You have been sentenced to 5 years of hard labor with a chain gang building the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad through the Rocky Mountains. The chain gang camp sprawled across a desolate stretch of Colorado territory like a wound carved into the earth. Rows of canvas tents housed the prisoners, while armed guards patrolled from wooden watchtowers that cast long shadows over the railroad construction site. The Denver and Rio Grande line was slowly clawing its way through the Rocky Mountains, built on the backs of convicts and desperate men. Eagle Feather had been shackled to the chain gang for 2 months. His ankle connected to a heavy iron link that bound him to 11 other prisoners. Each morning before dawn, they were marched to the construction site where massive granite boulders needed to be broken into smaller pieces for the railroad bed. The work was backbreaking. 12 hours under the scorching sun, swinging 16-pound sledgehammers against unyielding stone. The guards showed no mercy to any prisoner who faltered or complained. Eagle Feather watched as weaker men collapsed from exhaustion, only to be dragged back to their feet and forced to continue working. Move faster, you worthless animals, bellowed Overseer Johnson, a cruel man who seemed to take pleasure in the suffering of others. His leather whip cracked through the air as a constant reminder of his authority. The railroad company does not pay for lazy workers. Sleep offered little respite from the harsh conditions. The men were chained to iron stakes driven deep into the ground, preventing any possibility of escape during the night hours. The mountain air grew cold after sunset, but prisoners were given only thin blankets that provided minimal warmth. From her position working as a cook in the nearby settlement of Granite Falls, Maria observed the labor camp through a pair of field glasses she had purchased from a traveling merchant. Each day, she watched the chain gang being marched to their work site, searching desperately for any sign of Eagle Feather among the bent and broken figures. She had taken employment at the Silver Dollar restaurant, serving meals to railroad workers and camp guards. The job allowed her to gather information about the prison routine while earning enough money to survive. Winter storms had begun to lash the Colorado mountains with increasing fury, and Maria knew that Eagle Feather would not survive another season of hard labor in the chain gang. His proud frame had grown gaunt during the months of brutal work, and she could see the light fading from his eyes each time the prisoners were marched past the restaurant where she worked. Corporal Hayes was a young guard from Missouri who had gambling debts that exceeded his military salary. Maria had observed him losing money at poker games in the saloon every Saturday night, growing more desperate with each passing week. She approached him carefully one evening as he sat alone at the bar, drowning his sorrows in cheap whiskey. "I hear you might be interested in earning some extra money," Maria said quietly, sliding onto the bar stool beside him. She had saved every penny from her wages at the restaurant, accumulating nearly $50 over the past 3 months. Hayes looked at her suspiciously, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. "What kind of work are you talking about, lady?" "The kind that pays well and asks no questions," Maria replied, placing a small leather pouch containing 25 silver dollars on the bar between them. "I need information about the guard schedules at the prison camp." "Nothing more?" The corporal stared at the money with obvious longing. His gambling debts had grown to over $100, and his creditors were becoming increasingly threatening. Information about guard schedules could be considered treasonous. "Information about when the hay barn receives its weekly deliveries is hardly treasonous," Maria countered smoothly. "I am simply a woman interested in purchasing feed for her horses." Over the following weeks, Maria carefully studied the intelligence that Hayes provided. She learned that the guards changed shifts every 8 hours, with the smallest number of men on duty during the pre-dawn hours between 4 and 6 in the morning. The hay barn, which contained several tons of dried grass and straw, sat dangerously close to the prisoner barracks and the main guard station. Maria began stockpiling materials for her plan: coal oil from the general store, matches wrapped in oiled cloth to keep them dry, 2 fast horses purchased from a rancher who asked no questions about her intentions. She cached these supplies in an abandoned mine shaft 5 miles from the prison camp. The thunderstorm that swept across the Colorado Territory on the night of March 15th was the most violent anyone could remember. Lightning split the sky like the wrath of ancient gods, while thunder shook the mountains to their very foundations. It was the perfect cover for Maria's desperate plan. Under the cover of darkness and driving rain, Maria approached the prison camp with her heart hammering against her ribs. The coal oil sloshed quietly in the glass bottle she carried, while the oiled matches remained safely tucked inside her coat pocket. The storm had reduced visibility to mere yards, forcing the guards to seek shelter in their watchtowers. The hay barn burst into flames with shocking intensity, the dried grass and straw creating an inferno that illuminated the entire camp despite the pouring rain. Within minutes, the fire had spread to the wooden supply buildings and the guard quarters, sending men running in panic through the muddy compound. In the chaos and confusion, Maria reached the prisoner barracks where the chain gang was housed. The heavy padlock on their door had been left unguarded as every available man fought the spreading fires. Using a crowbar she had hidden earlier, Maria broke the lock and rushed inside to find Eagle Feather and his fellow prisoners. "Maria," Eagle Feather gasped in disbelief as she began working frantically to break the chains that bound him to the iron stake. "How did you manage this?" Questions later, "Running now," she replied, using a hammer and chisel to shatter the links that connected his ankle shackles. 3 other prisoners managed to break free in the confusion, following Maria and Eagle Feather into the storm last night. They reached the horses Maria had hidden in the abandoned mine shaft just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the storm clouds. Behind them, smoke still rose from the smoldering remains of the prison camp, while shouts and gunshots echoed across the valley as guards attempted to organize a pursuit. "Where can we go that they will not follow?" Eagle Feather asked as they mounted their horses, his voice weak from months of hard labor and poor nutrition. "North," Maria replied grimly, pulling her coat tighter against the cold mountain air. "We ride for the Canadian border, where American law cannot reach us." The pursuit lasted 17 days through some of the most treacherous terrain in the Rocky Mountains. Major Wilson and his cavalry unit followed their trail relentlessly, forcing Maria and Eagle Feather to travel only at night and rest during daylight hours in caves and hidden valleys. During their desperate flight through the mountains of northern Colorado, Maria fell gravely ill with pneumonia. The cold mountain air and constant exposure to harsh weather had weakened her lungs, leaving her struggling to breathe and burning with fever. Eagle Feather carried her on his horse for 3 days, using every herb and healing technique his grandmother had taught him as a child. "Leave me here," Maria whispered weakly as they sheltered in a grove of pine trees near the Wyoming border. "You can move faster alone. I will only slow you down and get us both captured." "No," Eagle Feather replied firmly, brewing a tea from willow bark to reduce her fever. "You saved my life. Now I will save yours. We reach Canada together, or we do not reach it at all." They crossed into Canadian territory on a cold April morning, fording the icy waters of a mountain stream that served as the international boundary. Behind them, Major Wilson and his soldiers were forced to halt their pursuit, unable to follow fugitives into British sovereign territory. The small settlement of Pine Ridge, Alberta, welcomed them with cautious hospitality. The local residents were mostly fur trappers, gold prospectors, and lumber workers who asked few questions about a man just past. Eagle Feather found work as a guide for hunting parties and surveying expeditions, while Maria slowly recovered her strength. Within 6 months, they had established a small medical clinic in a converted cabin on the edge of town. Maria treated everything from broken bones to gunshot wounds, while Eagle Feather provided his services as a tracker and wilderness guide. The partnership that had begun with mutual necessity had slowly transformed into something deeper and more meaningful. On a clear September evening, with the first snow of winter dusting the mountain peaks, Eagle Feather took Maria's hands in his own. "We have both lost everything we once held dear," he said quietly. "But perhaps we can build something new together." Their wedding was simple but heartfelt, witnessed by the small community that had embraced them as family. Maria Cornell became Maria Eagle Feather, starting a new chapter of her life beyond the reach of those who had cast her out. 5 years after their escape to Canada, a weathered envelope bearing the official seal of the United States Army arrived at their clinic in Pine Ridge. The letter came through the Canadian Postal Service, forwarded by sympathetic officials who had learned of their story. Major Wilson himself had written the correspondence, his formal military script carrying news that would change everything. A congressional investigation into prison labor abuses had uncovered widespread corruption in the railroad construction camps. Eagle Feather's conviction had been overturned, his military record restored with full honors for his years of faithful service as an Army Scout. The second letter arrived only weeks later, this one bearing the town seal of Silver Creek, Colorado. Mayor Henderson's son had taken over leadership of the community after his father's death from influenza. The younger Henderson wrote with humility and shame, describing how a new outbreak of scarlet fever had claimed 12 children despite the efforts of 3 different doctors who had replaced Maria. "We understand now what you faced," the letter read. "The disease was beyond any medical knowledge of our time. We acted in grief and ignorance, casting out the very person who had given everything to save our children. The town council has voted unanimously to restore your good name and extend our deepest apologies." Maria held the letter with trembling hands as Eagle Feather read over her shoulder. After years of exile and hardship, vindication had finally arrived. Yet as they looked around their modest Canadian clinic, filled with the grateful faces of patients who had become family, they both knew they had found something more valuable than mere forgiveness. They had found home.